Shedeur has to overwin. Shedeur has to not only win these battles, she has to do it in a way where he's above reproach. I think he did it in 3 ways. I think he acclimated himself well with his teammate.
A lot of this is just getting some guys ready who are playing on Saturday.
News there as well. Shedeur Sanders returned to practice today from his oblique strain suffered last week, and it looks to me like he's got a pretty decent shot of playing some against the Rams on Saturday in that dress rehearsal game. I think they really want to see him one more time. He had that really nice debut against the Panthers, and I think they want to get him out there and get him a little bit more live action before he potentially has to play at some point this season.
I'll tell you this. Now, he took too many sacks, and I'll put that on him. I'll put that on him in the system, and he's got to be better. But he's deadly accurate. He's got great touch. And when you watch him in that first preseason game, the thing that I loved, and I mean loved, is his ability to slide and his movement skills in the pocket and still being able to create space, not eyeballing the rush, but feeling the rush.
Last year?
Yeah, Watson.
Yeah. What year is this?
Wrong move. I think you should have looked at one of these rookies to see if you had your franchise quarterback in the building, whether it's Shedeur Sanders or Dillon Gabriel, who I felt both had good debuts here in the preseason. You know what Joe Flacco is. Don't make the comfortable, familiar decision. Figure out if one man that you drafted in the 3rd or the 5th round could be the guy.
Everyone's praising Shedeur Sanders for his midnight training sessions and perfect character. But what if I told you that this carefully crafted image is actually exposing his biggest weakness? While NFL scouts are calling emergency meetings and analysts like Mary Kay Cabot are completely reversing their opinions, I've been analyzing the psychology behind Sanders' every move, and what I discovered will completely change how you see this so-called franchise quarterback. The evidence is hiding in plain sight, and it reveals a player who might be too calculated for his own good. I'm about to challenge everything you think you know about Shedeur Sanders. While everyone's buying into the narrative of the dedicated athlete training in Florida thunderstorms and connecting with Cleveland kids, I've identified a pattern that suggests something far more concerning. This isn't about his arm talent or his ambidextrous abilities. This is about a young quarterback who's so obsessed with controlling his image that he might be sabotaging his actual development. By the end of this video, you'll see how Sanders' greatest strength, according to the media, might actually be the very thing that prevents him from reaching his potential. The signs are everywhere, from his strategic social media posts to his perfectly timed recovery from injury and even his critics' suspicious reversals. Let's start with those viral midnight training sessions that have everyone convinced Sanders is the hardest worker in football. Picture this. It's past midnight in Florida, thunderstorm conditions, and somehow there's professional quality footage of Sanders throwing perfect spirals in the rain. Ask yourself this critical question: who's filming? Who's operating the lights? Who's setting up these shots? This isn't spontaneous dedication. This is calculated content creation. Real grinders don't need cameras to validate their work ethic. Tom Brady didn't become great because he filmed himself throwing at midnight. He became great because he was obsessed with the process, not the perception of the process. Sanders' midnight sessions aren't about getting better. They're about looking better. Former NFL quarterback Ryan Leaf, who knows something about image management gone wrong, recently pointed out that the most dedicated players he knew were the ones you never saw training. They were in the facility at 5 a.m. when no cameras were rolling, studying film in empty meeting rooms, not creating content for social media consumption. But here's the most telling detail: Sanders' training footage always shows him succeeding. Every throw is perfect. Every drill is executed flawlessly. Real training involves failure, adjustment, and repetition. Where are the missed throws? Where are the moments of frustration? The fact that we only see highlight reel moments suggests these sessions are more about documentation than development. The psychology behind this behavior is concerning. Sanders isn't training to get better. He's training to prove he's better. There's a crucial difference. Players who train for improvement focus on their weaknesses. Players who train for image focus on their strengths. Sanders' midnight sessions consistently showcase what he already does well, throwing with precision, rather than addressing what scouts have identified as his biggest weakness, decision-making under pressure. Mark Schlereth noted that Sanders took too many sacks and needs to be better with his pocket presence. Yet none of Sanders' viral training content addresses this fundamental issue. Instead, we see perfectly choreographed throwing sessions that avoid the very situations where he struggles most. This selective training approach reveals a player more concerned with maintaining his image than addressing his deficiencies. The timing of these training releases is also suspicious. They always seem to coincide with moments when Sanders needs positive press. Injured and sidelined? Released midnight training footage. Critics questioning his readiness? Post ambidextrous throwing videos. This isn't coincidence, it's crisis management disguised as dedication. Sanders' community engagement in Cleveland has been universally praised, but let's examine what's really happening behind those heartwarming interactions with local kids. Every community appearance is perfectly documented, every interaction with young fans is captured on camera, and every charitable gesture is strategically publicized. This isn't organic community building, it's sophisticated public relations. Compare Sanders' approach to genuinely community-minded athletes like J.J. Watt or Russell Wilson. Their charitable work often goes unnoticed for months or years before being discovered by media. They build relationships quietly, consistently, and without fanfare. Sanders' community engagement, by contrast, is immediately broadcast across all platforms with professional quality documentation. The psychological profile this reveals is troubling. Sanders isn't connecting with the Cleveland community because he cares about Cleveland. He's connecting because he understands that community support creates organizational pressure to play him. It's a calculated move to build a fan base that will demand his inclusion, regardless of his actual readiness. Watch the footage of Sanders interacting with kids during his training sessions. Notice how he always positions himself perfectly for the cameras, how his responses are media-ready sound bites, how every interaction feels rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Genuine community connection doesn't require professional documentation. The most revealing aspect of Sanders' community strategy is its timing. These interactions intensified precisely when his roster spot was most in question. When healthy and competing for playing time, Sanders was highly visible in the community. When injured and sidelined, the community appearances continued at the same pace. This suggests the engagement is driven by career necessity rather than personal passion. Sanders' statement about working hard, loving football, and having no off-field problems sounds admirable until you realize it's a perfectly crafted PR message designed to address every possible criticism. It's too clean, too calculated, too aware of what NFL organizations want to hear. Authentic players don't speak in press release language, they speak from the heart, with imperfections and genuine emotion. The Cleveland community has embraced Sanders, but they're embracing a carefully constructed persona, not the real person. This creates a dangerous dynamic where Sanders becomes trapped by his own image. He can't show vulnerability, can't admit struggles, can't be human because it would contradict the perfect character narrative he's created. Former NFL executive Mike Tannenbaum recently warned about players who are too good to be true in their public presentation. He noted that the most successful quarterbacks are those who can be authentic under pressure, not those who maintain perfect images. Sanders' community engagement, while admirable on the surface, reveals a player who may be more concerned with being liked than being real. The most damning evidence of Sanders' calculated approach isn't his training or community work, it's how systematically he's manipulated media perception. Mary Kay Cabot's complete reversal from critic to advocate didn't happen because Sanders suddenly improved. It happened because Sanders successfully executed a media manipulation strategy. Cabot went from questioning Sanders' readiness and NFL-level complexity comprehension to declaring him officially ready after just 2 weeks of OTAs and minicamp. This isn't normal evaluation progression. This is the result of targeted influence. Sanders didn't just improve his play, he improved his relationship with key media figures who control the narrative. The timing is suspicious. Cabot's reversal coincided perfectly with Sanders' return from injury and his increased community visibility. This suggests Sanders' team understood exactly which critics needed to be won over and deployed specific strategies to influence their opinions. Professional athletes don't accidentally convert their harshest critics, they do it through calculated relationship building. Herm Edwards' prediction that Sanders would win the starting job outright from day one is even more revealing. Edwards has evaluated hundreds of quarterbacks transitioning from college to the NFL. For him to make such a bold prediction about a rookie suggests he's been influenced by factors beyond pure football evaluation. Sanders' off-field presentation has created a halo effect that's clouding objective assessment of his on-field readiness. The pattern extends beyond individual critics. Notice how every positive Sanders story follows the same narrative structure. Initial skepticism, followed by amazement at his work ethic, followed by complete conversion to believer status. This isn't organic opinion evolution. It's the result of a coordinated media strategy designed to create momentum through manufactured consensus. Ryan Clark's criticism of the Browns for not giving Sanders more opportunities reveals how effectively this strategy has worked. Clark isn't evaluating Sanders based on his preseason performance. He's evaluating him based on the narrative Sanders has created around himself. The midnight training, the community engagement, the perfect character presentation has convinced analysts that Sanders deserves opportunities regardless of his actual readiness. The most concerning aspect is how Sanders has weaponized his work ethic against legitimate criticism. Any analyst who questions his readiness now faces the implicit accusation of not recognizing dedication and character. This creates a media environment where objective evaluation becomes difficult because criticizing Sanders feels like criticizing virtue itself. Garrett Bush's observation that Sanders is playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers inadvertently reveals the problem. Sanders isn't focused on football development, he's focused on perception management. He's optimizing for media coverage rather than game performance, and the results show in his on-field struggles that get overshadowed by his off-field presentation. Sanders' ambidextrous throwing ability has generated massive buzz, but it's actually a perfect example of how he prioritizes spectacle over substance. While everyone's amazed by his ability to throw with both hands, they're ignoring the fundamental quarterback skills where he still struggles. This isn't evolution. It's misdirection. The ambidextrous throws look impressive in controlled training environments, but they reveal a concerning mindset. Instead of dedicating that practice time to improving his pocket presence, the area where Mark Schlereth noted he took too many sacks, Sanders is developing a skill that's more about highlight reels than winning games. It's the football equivalent of learning trick shots instead of perfecting your fundamentals. Former NFL defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer's comment about preparing for an ambidextrous quarterback being like defending against two different players sounds impressive until you realize that Sanders' left-handed throws are only effective in practice settings. Under real game pressure, with pass rushers closing in and defensive backs reading his eyes, the ambidextrous ability becomes a liability rather than an asset. The physics of quarterbacking don't change based on which hand you use. Accuracy, timing, and decision-making remain the critical factors. Sanders' focus on developing ambidextrous skills suggests he's more interested in being unique than being effective. Great quarterbacks master the fundamentals with their dominant hand before exploring alternatives. Watch Sanders' preseason footage carefully. His most successful plays come from traditional right-handed throws with proper footwork and timing. His struggles come from situations requiring quick decisions under pressure, exactly the scenarios where ambidextrous throwing becomes irrelevant. Yet Sanders continues to dedicate significant practice time to developing a skill that doesn't address his actual weaknesses. The media's fascination with Sanders' ambidextrous ability has created a dangerous feedback loop. The more attention it receives, the more Sanders focuses on developing it, taking time away from the fundamental skills that actually determine NFL success. It's become a performance art piece rather than football development. NFL history is littered with quarterbacks who possessed unique physical abilities but failed because they neglected fundamentals. Tim Tebow could run and throw with incredible power, but his mechanics and decision-making prevented sustained success. Sanders' ambidextrous throwing could follow the same pattern, impressive in isolation, ineffective in game situations. The most telling aspect is how Sanders presents this ability. Instead of treating it as a minor skill variation, he's made it central to his identity as a player. This suggests a player who's more concerned with being remembered for being different than being remembered for being great. Championship quarterbacks are remembered for wins, not for unique throwing techniques. Stefanski's vague responses about the quarterback depth chart might reflect genuine concern about Sanders' priorities. When a player spends significant time developing gimmick skills while struggling with fundamental concepts, it raises questions about their football IQ and commitment to team success over personal branding. Sanders' declaration that "I will not be deterred" sounds like confidence, but it actually reveals the psychological fragility that undermines everything else. This statement isn't the battle cry of a secure competitor, it's the defensive posture of someone who's already anticipating failure and preparing excuses. Truly confident quarterbacks don't need to declare their determination publicly. Tom Brady never felt compelled to announce he wouldn't be deterred. Aaron Rodgers doesn't post motivational statements about his mindset. They let their performance speak for itself. Sanders' need to verbalize his determination suggests he's trying to convince himself as much as his audience. The psychology behind this statement is revealing. "I will not be deterred" implies that Sanders expects to face deterrence, that he's already mentally preparing for obstacles, criticism, and setbacks. This defensive mindset is the opposite of the offensive mentality required for NFL success. Championship quarterbacks expect success. They don't prepare for persecution. Sanders' entire public persona is built around responding to doubters rather than focusing on his own development. His midnight training is positioned as a response to critics. His community engagement is framed as proving his character to skeptics. His ambidextrous throwing is presented as silencing doubters. This reactive approach reveals a player who's more motivated by external validation than internal drive. The most concerning aspect is how Sanders has made his critics part of his identity. He needs doubters to fuel his motivation, which creates a dangerous dependency on external negativity. What happens when the criticism stops? What happens when he's universally praised? Players who rely on external motivation often struggle when that motivation disappears. Compare this to genuinely confident quarterbacks who are motivated by internal standards rather than external opinions. They don't need critics to drive them, they're driven by their own pursuit of excellence. Sanders' dependence on proving doubters wrong suggests he lacks the internal motivation system required for sustained NFL success. The timing of Sanders' "I will not be deterred" statement is also suspicious. It came precisely when his roster position was most secure, not when he was facing the greatest challenges. This suggests the statement was more about maintaining his brand narrative than expressing genuine determination in the face of adversity. Stefanski's careful handling of Sanders might reflect awareness of this psychological fragility. The coach's vague responses and measured approach could be designed to avoid triggering Sanders' defensive mechanisms. This creates an unhealthy dynamic where the organization has to manage the player's psychology rather than simply developing his skills. The most damaging aspect of Sanders' mentality is how it prevents genuine self-assessment. When you're constantly in "I will not be deterred" mode, you can't honestly evaluate your weaknesses because acknowledging them feels like giving ammunition to critics. This defensive posture inhibits the honest self-reflection required for improvement. We've seen how Sanders' midnight training sessions are more about content creation than skill development, how his community engagement follows a calculated PR strategy rather than genuine connection, how he systematically manipulated media critics through relationship building rather than performance improvement, how his ambidextrous throwing ability distracts from fundamental weaknesses, and how his "I will not be deterred" mentality reveals deep-seated insecurity rather than confidence. The evidence is overwhelming. Shedeur Sanders has created a perfect character narrative that's actually preventing him from becoming the player everyone thinks he already is. His obsession with image management is taking time and energy away from the football development he desperately needs. While everyone's praising his character, they're missing the character flaw that could derail his entire career: the inability to be authentic under pressure. The Browns organization might be seeing what we're missing. Stefanski's vague responses and careful handling suggest they understand that Sanders' greatest strength, according to the media, might actually be his greatest weakness as a player. The question isn't whether Sanders has the talent to succeed in the NFL, it's whether he can stop performing long enough to actually develop that talent. What do you think? Am I completely wrong about Sanders' calculated approach, or have you noticed these same patterns? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And be honest, because unlike Sanders, we don't need to manage our image here. If you want to see more analysis that challenges the mainstream narrative, make sure you're subscribed. Next week, I'm breaking down 3 other high-character prospects who might be too good to be true.